Ibrahim Traoré humiliates Netanyahu on live TV over Iran-Israel war. The camera pans across a packed press room in Addis Ababa. The air is thick with anticipation, microphones raised, journalists leaning forward, global networks broadcasting. Live two figures stand at the center of it all, one dressed in tailored Western formal wear, the other draped in traditional African fabric embroidered with symbols of resistance. One speaks softly, nods politely. The other watches calculating, waiting. This was supposed to be a routine diplomatic event. A handshake, a few prepared statements, a photo op. But something feels different. The lights glare. The silence between questions hums like static. And then he steps forward. No script, no hesitation, just truth. He begins not with pleasantries, but with pain. I have seen what war does, he says, his voice calm, controlled. I have walked through villages burned by extremists. I have held the hands of mothers who lost children to violence. Then he pivots. What we see in Gaza, he continues, is not conflict. It is annihilation. The room stirs. Porters glance sideways. Someone exhales sharply into their mic. He doesn't stop. He names the dead. He cites numbers buried beneath bureaucracy. He accuses powerful nations of looking away. While hospitals are bombed and water is cut off, he calls out the hypocrisy of calling some acts terrorism while legitimizing others. And then, the line that will echo across continents. We were colonized once. We won't be complicit in colonization again. The weight of the moment lands like a thundrclap. It starts with a single clip. Just 12 seconds long, Traoré's face fills the screen. His eyes don't waver. His voice doesn't tremble. Then the hashtag appears. Hashtag Traorés Netanyahu. Minutes. Later it trends worldwide. In Lagos, students gather around phones, replaying the footage. In Jakarta, activists share it with captions in Indonesian, Malay, Arabic. In Paris, diplomats scramble for damage control briefings. Across social media, the phrase spreads like wildfire. We were colonized once. We won't be complicit in colonization. Again, it becomes more than a quote. It becomes a rallying cry. And in that moment, the world realizes this wasn't just a diplomatic misstep. This was a reckoning. For the first time in decades, Benjamin Netanyahu looks unprepared. His jaw tightens. His fingers twitch slightly against the podium. The man known for his ironclad control now stands frozen, flanked by aides who whisper urgently into headsets. He tries to respond. Starts with a rehearsed line about security threats, about Hamas, about Israel's right to defend itself. But the room has already shifted. Reporters no longer look to him for answers. They watch the Burkinabe leader instead, the man who dared to speak when silence was safer. Netanyahu's voice rises. He gestures toward the cameras, but the momentum is gone. He knows it, and so does everyone else. Traoré steps back from the podium. No bow, no handshake, no final remark. He simply walks. Away, the cameras follow. Every step echoes louder than the last. Each movement is studied, dissected, replayed behind him. Netanyahu remains standing alone under the glare of the lights, surrounded by aides who rush to salvage the moment. Outside the press room, streets buzz with reaction. Protest signs appear within hours. Hashtags flood timelines. As broadcast anchors interrupt regular programming. This was not diplomacy as usual. This was a declaration. And as the footage loops endlessly online, one thing becomes clear. History has just been rewritten, not in a palace or a parliament, but on live television. He did not rise through the ranks of politics. As foreign flags fluttered over his country's institutions, while its people starved, he saw leaders come and go, each promising change, each falling silent under pressure. So he took power, not with violence. Halls of global diplomacy, his mission was clear: reclaim sovereignty, reject interference, build a new path, one that did not bow to any empire, and now on the world stage. He would test that conviction like never before. Tel Aviv watched the rise of African. The war in Gaza had fractured Israel's standing, uncensurable support from Western capitals. now wavered under pressure from public opinion and humanitarian outcry. Africa became the next frontier, not just for aid or intelligence, for image, for legitimacy. Located politically volatile and led by a man who had already defied expectations, Traoré was not part of the old game. He wasn't playing for aid or influence. He was playing for history, and Netanyahu knew it. Across Africa, leaders faced a choice: support the West's stance, condemn Hamas, accept Israeli narratives, maintain access to aid and trade, or risk isolation, sanctions, and accusations of extremism. Some chose pragmatism. Others chose principle. In Senegal, protests erupted outside embassies. In Nigeria, students marched with banners reading, "No justice, no peace." In South Africa, Parliament debated whether to recall its ambassador. Public sentiment turned sharply against the destruction in Gaza. The images were too graphic, the numbers too high, the denials too hollow, and yet behind closed doors, many leaders remained cautious. Speaking out could cost them everything, except one. One leader decided to say what others only whispered, and he would do it on live television. The calls came first. Israeli envoys reached out through intermediaries. Offers were made: military equipment, training, intelligence sharing. Some Burkinabe officials listened. Some even agreed, but not the president. Then came the warnings. If you take this stance, and aid relayed, you will lose access to counterterrorism funding. Leaked reports showed Israeli operatives attempting to sway key ministers. Some tried to tempt him with personal wealth. Others threatened exposure of past actions. He didn't flinch. He had seen worse. He had lived worse. This was not about money or fear. It was about truth, and the time had come to speak at Traoré. Each sentence weighed like a bullet. Each phrase measured for impact. "Too soft," he said after the first version. "Too diplomatic," he replied after the second. Finally, he took the pen, wrote in silence. No hiding behind unresolutions or policy statements. This would be direct, unfiltered. He would name the dead. He would. Not just a press conference, he said. It's a reckoning. And the world would watch. The first contact comes through a box channel. Coded message slips into an encrypted inbox. No names, just a time. In the capital's quieter districts, away from the noise of Ouagadougou's bustling markets and dust-choked streets, a meeting takes place in a dimly lit room behind a shuttered cafe. An Israeli operative sits across from a mid-level Burkinabe official. The offer is simple: upgraded military gear, intelligence support, and a quiet promise you'll be taken care of. Some take it, others refuse. Loyalty fractures like dry earth under pressure. More meetings follow, in embassies, on secure calls, at private dinners where wine flows freely, but words are measured. Traoré knows what's happening, doesn't stop it. He watches. He listens, because he understands that before any leader can speak truth to power, they must first see who among their own fears that truth. Inside the presidential compound, the lights stay on late. A former journalist, now one of his closest advisors, leans forward across the table. Her voice is low, urgent. "You can't fight the whole world alone," she says. Outside, the city sleeps. Inside, the weight of history presses down. Traoré doesn't look up. He continues reading reports, satellite images of Gaza, leaked diplomatic cables, footage of protests in Accra and Pretoria. Finally, he speaks. "I'm not fighting the world," he says. "I'm fighting silence." She exhales sharply. "Shh. Seen leaders fall for less than this. You know what this means?" she warns. "Yes," he replies. "That's why I have to do it." Tel Aviv isn't the only one watching. Washington picks up the phone first. It's a casual call. Then another. Then a visit. U.S. envoys arrive with smiles and firm handshakes. They talk about partnership, about shared security interests, about the importance of maintaining stability in the shell. Then comes the real message. Buried beneath layers of diplomacy, this isn't just about Israel. It's about your place in the world. French diplomats follow. Old ties die hard. They remind him of France's role in his country's past, Not as liberators, but as rulers. They don't threaten him outright. They don't need to. One envoy stays after the others leave, places a hand on Traoré's shoulder. "Think carefully," he says. "Once you cross this line, there's no coming back." Traoré nods. He thanks them all. Then he walks away and begins writing again. Tel Aviv scrambles, Israeli. Strategists pore over every detail of Traoré's public record. His speeches, his policies, his alliances. They expected resistance, not defiance. Netanyahu had planned this. Trip carefully. Burkina Faso was meant to be a win. A quiet endorsement, a handshake, a symbolic show of unity in a world growing cold. Now, it could become a disaster. Internal memos circulate. One suggests delaying the press conference. Another proposes canceling it entirely, but Netanyahu refuses. He won't be made a pawn in someone else's narrative. Instead, he prepares his own response, sharp, calculated, designed to regain control. He rehearses lines, studies body language, adjusts his tone. He will not let Africa write his legacy, but in the end, it may not matter. Because some men come to the stage to speak, others come to be heard, and Traoré has already decided which one he is. In the hours before the press conference, the tension inside the Burkinabe delegation is palpable. Aides move quickly between rooms. Phones buzz constantly. Security details tighten. Traoré stands alone in a quiet corridor, reviewing his notes one last time. His chief of staff approaches. "We can still soften it," he says. "No." Traoré replies, "We can't." The aide hesitates, then nods. Outside, the sun sets over Addis Ababa. The world watches. The cameras wait. Traoré folds the paper, slips it into his pocket. He knows what comes next. Sanctions, isolation, pressure, or history. He steps toward the door and walks into the storm. The cameras roll. The lights burn hot. Netanyahu steps to the podium first, poised, practiced. A man who has done this dance hundreds of times before. He speaks in measured tones. He thanks his host. He praises cooperation, calls for peace. But when asked about Gaza, he shifts gears smoothly, predictably. "This is not just a war," he says. "It's a fight for survival." Reporters scribble notes. Analysts lean in. The world watches, expecting more of the same. Then comes the moment that changes everything. Traoré steps forward, and the room forgets how to breathe. He begins softly, not with fire, not with fury, but with facts. He reads off numbers, casualty, counts buried beneath layers of bureaucracy and media fatigue. He cites reports from the United Nations, Médecins Sans Frontières, and independent journalists embedded in Gaza. He does not accuse. He does not shout. He simply tells the truth, and then he goes deeper. He compares what is happening in Gaza to the colonial wars fought across Africa decades ago. The villages razed, the children buried under rubble, the slow erasure of a people. The room grows still. Aides exchange uneasy glances. Netanyahu's jaw tightens. This was supposed to be diplomacy instead. It feels like reckoning. A reporter raises her hand. "President Traoré, do you support Hamas?" The question lands like a grenade. For a moment, silence. Then Traoré speaks. "I support people under siege," he says. "That's not ideology, that's humanity." The words hang in the air. Some in the press corps scribble furiously. Others blink in disbelief. Across the globe, the line is instantly replayed on loop. In Lagos, in Jakarta, in Santiago, people stop what they're doing. They've heard many things from leaders, but rarely this. Truth, unfiltered. Netanyahu leans into the mic. His voice sharpens. His tone hardens. He warns of extremism. He invokes security threats, reminds him. The world that Israel did not choose this war. Hamas did. He tries to reclaim the narrative. Tries. But the ground has shifted. Reporters no longer look to him for answers. They watch Traoré instead. The man who spoke not as a politician, but as a witness, Netanyahu gestures toward the cameras. He mentions terrorism. He repeats the word survival 3 times in one sentence. He is speaking to power. Traoré is speaking to conscience. And in that moment, the difference becomes undeniable. Traoré steps back up to the microphone. One last time, he doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. You cannot claim self-defense while bulldozing hospitals, he says. You cannot demand legitimacy while denying dignity. The camera catches Netanyahu's face. A flicker of something unspoken, surprise, defeat, no one can say for sure. Because the next thing anyone knows, Traoré walks away. No handshake, no smile, no apology, just silence, and the sound of history turning. It starts with a clip, just under 2 minutes long. Traoré at the podium. The camera tight on his face, his voice unwavering. It's the line that will define a generation. We were colonized once. We won't be complicit in colonization again. Within hours, it's everywhere. #Truff as Netanyahu trends globally. Memes flood timelines. Stills of Netanyahu frozen mid-sentence beside images of Traoré walking away from the mic like a man stepping into history. In Jakarta, a university student shares the speech with a caption, "This is what leadership looks like." In Santiago, a protest sign reads, "Gaza is not alone." Across platforms, the footage loops endlessly. Commentators dissect every word. Hashtags multiply. Reactions pour in from Lagos to London, from Pretoria to Paris. And for the first time in years, the world isn't just watching Africa, it's listening. The African Union issues a carefully worded statement, neutral. It's diplomatic, cautious. But elsewhere, the response is anything but quiet. A handful of African nations issue full-throated support. Some recall ambassadors. Others demand urgent inaction. Arab League members send private messages of gratitude. One calls the moment a turning point. Another forwards the video to regional leaders with one message, "Let this be our unity." In Washington, reactions are colder. State Department officials release a terse note calling for diplomatic restraint. But behind closed doors, the mood is far more urgent. Policymakers fear a domino effect, not just in Africa, but across the global south. Because if one leader can defy Israel and survive, what else might change? Aside the situation. Room analysts scrambled maps of Africa light up the screens. Diplomatic cables fly between embassies. Intelligence reports flag rising anti-Western sentiment. One official warns bluntly, if we lose Burkina Faso, we lose credibility across the Sahel. Other counters, we don't need credibility, we need control. Aid packages are quietly reviewed. Military cooperation agreements stall. A decision looms. Double down on sanctions, or find a way to bring Traoré back into the fold. But no one agrees on how, because this isn't about policy anymore. It's about perception. And perception, once shifted, is nearly impossible to shift. Back in Israel, the fallout hits hard. Polls show slipping public support. Protest signs appear outside Tel Aviv cafes. International journalists question whether Israel's diplomatic strategy is sustainable. Behind closed doors, Netanyahu's inner circle meets an emergency session. Some call for immediate damage control, a counter-narrative. Campaign to reframe the story. PR teams mobilize. Analysts draft talking points. Spin doctors prepare their scripts. But nothing can erase what the world has already seen. A leader from the global south, standing tall, speaking truth, refusing silence. And in the age of digital diplomacy, visuals matter more than rhetoric. Israel may have the power, but Traoré has the image. And that image, broadcast across continents, cannot be undone. In Lagos, students gather outside the Israeli embassy. They hold signs quoting Traoré's words. They chant in Yoruba, English, Arabic. In Tunis, a high school teacher plays the press conference for her class. She pauses on the line. "I support people under siege." That's not ideology, that's humanity. She doesn't explain. She lets the students react. One says, For once, someone spoke for us, not at us. Across the global south, young leaders watch closely. Activists share the footage with notes. This is how you resist without violence. In Nairobi, Santiago, and Jakarta, new conversations begin about sovereignty, about independence, about the right to speak and to be heard. And as night falls over Ouagadougou, the city pulses with energy because the world knows now. Africa does not ask, Africa speaks, and the world finally listens. The plane touches down in Ouagadougou under a sky streaked with gold and dust. As the ramp lowers, the roar hits like thunder. Crowds line the tarmac, not just officials and dignitaries, but ordinary people. Children wave flags. Elders clap. With tear-filled eyes, the national anthem plays, but it's drowned out by chants. Asterisk, Traoré. Traoré, he steps forward. No sunglasses, no entourage shielding him. Just one man walking into the arms of his people. Reporters follow as he moves. Through the city, every street is alive. Murals appear overnight, painted on crumbling walls, market stalls, even the sides of taxis. One image spreads faster than the rest, Traoré standing between. Mandela and Lumumba. 3 leaders. 3 moments in history. All speaking truth to power. And now, a 4th. Burkina Faso becomes a magnet. Not for aid. Not for weapons, but for influence. Trade delegations arrive from Accra, Doha, Tehran. Contracts are signed. Investments promised. Agreements made without Western oversight. A new economic corridor opens, not east-west, but south-south. Western diplomats watch closely. Some call it dangerous. Others call it inevitable, because Africa is no longer waiting for permission. It is choosing its own partners, and it is doing so on its own terms. In Addis Ababa, whispers grow louder among African leaders about forming a unified front, not military, not ideological, but diplomatic. A bloc that does not align with Washington or Moscow, Beijing or Brussels. A bloc that speaks for itself. The response comes swiftly. Sanctions are hinted at. Military cooperation stalls. Behind closed doors, Western envoys debate their next move. Some argue for pressure, others warn of backlash. 1. Diplomat sums it up plainly. We've lost the narrative. In Ouagadougou, Traoré addresses the nation. We built our country before your money, he says. We'll build it again. The camera catches the moment. Not a speech, not a rally, but a quiet declaration. And the people believe him, because they remember what life was like before foreign. Strings came with every dollar. They remember what it means to stand. It's alone, and they are ready. Tel Aviv burns with protest signs. You sold us peace, reads one. But all we got was war. Netanyahu walks through government corridors quieter than they've been in years. Allies hesitate. Polls drop. Donors question whether Israel's diplomacy can survive the fallout. International journalists begin asking harder questions. Is Israel losing its global standing? Has the world turned against it? Even longtime supporters hesitate to defend the indefensible, because the images don't lie, and neither does the silence from those who once spoke loudly in support. Netanyahu tries to pivot. He gives interviews, he reshuffles his cabinet, he doubles down on security rhetoric, but the damage isn't in policy, it's in perception. And perception, once shattered, is nearly impossible to rebuild. Across the global south, something stirs informally. Quietly, leaders begin reaching out. Calls between Jakarta and Pretoria. Meetings in Caracas and Accra. Delegates from Nairobi and Kathmandu meet in neutral cities. No flags. No formal declarations. Just conversations. About sovereignty. About self-determination. It's about refusing to be pawns in someone else's game. Phrase spreads like a whisper carried on wind. Decolonization is not over. And this time, it's not fought with guns. It's fought with decisions. With defiance, with leaders who refuse to speak only when spoken to, and who choose, finally, to speak first. History does not remember every handshake. It forgets most speeches, but it never lets go of a moment that changes everything. Not the ones scripted in back rooms, not the ones polished for cameras. The raw, unfiltered moments when someone steps. Conviction and defiance. And history took note because power doesn't always reside in wealth or weapons. Sometimes it lives in truth, and sometimes that truth comes from the most unexpected place. Traoré did not speak as an enemy of the West. He did not call for war, nor did he reject diplomacy. What he rejected was silence. The kind of silence that allows destruction. They can do anything as long as they do it quietly enough. In speaking out, he became more than a leader. He became a voice, not just for Africa, but for the global South, for those who have been watched but never heard. And in doing so, he reminded the world there is no neutrality in complicity, only courage or its absence. Power isn't always found in palaces, or parliaments, or press releases signed in triplicate. Sometimes you may fall, but still refusing to kneel. That is leadership, not measured in votes. Others feel emboldened to speak after you, because once one voice breaks the silence, others follow, and then the silence is gone forever. In classrooms across continents, students replay the footage. They pause on his face, on his words. On the moment he turned away from the podium without apology, teachers use the clip not just to teach politics, but to define principle. Students quote him in essays, in protests, in late-night conversations under streetlights in dormitory. We were colonized once. We won't be complicit in colonization again. These lines are not just remembered, they are lived, because leadership is not. It's about timing. It's about timing, and he chose his moment perfectly. As the documentary ends, the final image lingers, Traoré walking away. Cameras flash, reporters scramble, the world watches, and for once, it doesn't look away. Then, the screen dearens. Silence until a single line appears in white text. The oppressed must not only fight to be free, but also to be heard. And as the credits roll, one thing becomes clear. This was not just a story about one man or one press conference. It was a reckoning, a shift, a new chapter in a world that had finally begun to listen. Fade to black.